BeeBusinessBee China research example. In this short presentation I'm going to look at an example organisation that maybe you could use for your BeeBusinessBee exam. What I've tried to do is use a different example to probably one that many of you have seen before, to try and show you how you can look slightly away from the norm and still be able to apply some knowledge and get some application towards an organisation within your answer. So this presentation is going to look all about the VW Group. So the VW Group, as you can probably see there, is a car manufacturer. Hopefully you're all aware of that, and they've actually diversified into China. They made that move in 1984, and since that day they've continued to grow until they are now deemed to be the largest manufacturer of cars based on the brands that they own. Okay, they sold 2.81 million cars in China, with China being listed as their fastest growing market. They actually have manufacturing plants all across China and are continually looking to expand, typically to areas where the wage is lower, so that they can capitalise on a lower unit cost. They tend to import brands such as Audi, Bentley and Lamborghini, yet they'll manufacture their own brands such as VW, Skoda and Seat within the Chinese market. They first established their joint venture in 1984, which they signed a deal with the Shanghai Motoring Organization, and that was for their first manufacturing plant. They had 50% ownership of this, and they've since agreed into other joint ventures in the country. Because of the increasing levels of disposable income, China has now become a really good market for car manufacturers, especially VW Group. And they see that the increasing levels in disposable income and the increase in the middle classes is going to push more consumers away from the low budget brands and into the higher brands such as the VW brand and maybe even to the Audis, for example. And some of the affluents are looking at the Bentleys, Lamborghinis, and that's why VW are keen to exploit the Chinese market. Notice there's many different focuses they've got within this organisation and this market they're in. They are becoming a recognised and trusted brand, partly because of their move to China in 1984 has enabled them to be seen as a Chinese brand and being recognised as a brand that values China. And that's really critical to obviously that cultural belief with the Chinese that it's one of their own. And as I said, they've adapted to the Chinese culture. By doing that, they are seen as part of China. It's been one of the strong points. Okay, you're going to be asked in your exam to look in these different areas. So in your research you're meant to cover the extent to which China creates opportunities and threats for businesses, the risks and rewards involved in trading with or operating in China, the factors affecting the success or failure of businesses trading or operating in China, the relative advantages and disadvantages of the ways in which businesses might operate in China, the ethical and environmental issues involved in trading with or operating in China, and how business strategy might be affected by developments in China. What I'm going to try and do in these next few slides now is look at how those points can be applied to VW Group specifically and trying to home down in them areas. So let's start with the point here. So the extent to which China creates opportunities and threats for businesses. Now, China is the fastest growing automobile market in the world. It's actually got a growth rate of about 15%. So it's seen as one of the highest focal points of the VW brand. They are really focusing their efforts on trying to exploit and grow in this market. They have got extensive competition from other brands as well as Chinese manufacturers. We'll look at that in a minute. The increasing levels of disposable income is a real appealing factor to the VW Group. They believe that this is going to drive an increase in consumer spending and more so towards higher level cars and higher brands such as their own brand. The increasing level of brand awareness. Now this goes with their globalization. They know what the VW brand is, they know what it stands for, and VW has spent money and time trying to get that image across about being quality, about being technical, and the Chinese markets are now starting to respond to this. The strengthening currency is now starting to make importing more appealing. So for example, importing Audis, Bentleys, Lamborghinis is becoming more apparent cheaper to the Chinese audience, and as a result of this it's making it more appealing and more attractive to import vehicles to China as well as exporting from China. VW Group currently has a 14.6% share of the car market. They have been recently announced to be the largest manufacturer of cars when you take all their brands into account in the Chinese market. That is quite an impressive feat for an organisation. And the potential driving market is actually 1.3 billion people. So you can see that this could lead to massive rewards. However, let's look on the other side. Potential threats. You've got the increasing rate of inflation. China's inflation rate is increasing. It's currently quoted to be 2.5. CPI, some reckon the RPI is about 5%. So China's rate of inflation will increase the quicker it grows. Remember, more spending is going to create more wage rises. The more that we drive towards this middle class, the more we're going to see costs increase, and that could have an impact on the low-cost approach they've taken for their cars at the moment, and maybe also the competitiveness of the actual marketplace. Then you've got the fact that the state-controlled car manufacturers have got a foothold. Now remember, you've got this idea about joint ventures that they've got to take out, but you've also got Shanghai Automotive, who are a massive organisation. They've bought the rights to MG Rover in the UK, and they are the largest single-controlled car manufacturer in China. And as a result, they can make it at a very low cost, and they've got very high technical expertise. You've got the customer loyalty to the local car brand. So Shanghai Automotive has got an extensive amount of customer loyalty within its customer base, and they are not going to diversify away from their brand just yet. VW have got to try and tempt them away by hoping that the drive towards middle classes is going to actually push the Chinese market to try and look for something a little bit different, a little bit better than what they're currently expecting. You've got obviously increasing levels. You've got every car manufacturer in the world is trying to get into China at the moment. You've got BMW, you've got Ford, you've got even General Motors trying to get a foothold in there. Daimler, Chrysler are all in there. Everybody is trying to get into the Chinese market, and because of that, it's leading to more competition, which is forcing prices to get lower, and it's enabling basically the lower budget Chinese brands to still compete in that marketplace. You've got increasing amounts of legislation. China is getting a little bit concerned about its pollution levels, about the congestion on the roads, and as a result they're bringing in legislation to limit this, such as 1 car per household has been suggested as one of their new legislations. They're definitely going to bring in environmental legislations to reduce the amount of smog that's been brought in. This is all going to potentially have a massive impact on the car sales and the organisation of VW in China. And then of course you've got this technological change. If you are looking to bring in legislation to protect the environment and the way the environment is run in China, so you want to reduce pollution, then you're going to have to look to try and bring in tighter controls, and that's going to mean more technology on cars. There are concerns in China, as you know, about property, intellectual property rights. So do the manufacturers want to bring their more advanced technology over to China just yet, in case it gets stolen and used by the Chinese manufacturers and it takes away their unique selling point, their competitive edge? All factors we need to consider when we're thinking about VW operating in China. Okay, let's take a look at the risks and rewards involved with trading with and operating in China. One of the obvious risks that you've got is the fact that state-controlled manufacturers can dominate the market at the moment, and you've got to have these joint ventures, which potentially can cause a problem, because you are battling against a country-owned organisation which is going to be obviously protected by the Chinese government because it wants to ensure they are going to succeed. This can make it difficult for you to have that competitive edge in a market which is fast growing. The economic growth rate is starting to slow. It's below the 8% quoted figure they want, 7.5%. So this could have an impact on spending. Again, this depends on how we view it, because the economic growth rate might be starting to slow because inflation is starting to creep up. The real level of inflation, the RPI figure, is estimated to peak at about 7.5% fairly soon. The increasing cost of housing in China, that's going to consume more disposable income, which may not get spent on the second most viable purchase you're going to make of a car, for example. Now the Chinese have a culture of saving. If they start to save, if they start to fear that inflation starts to increase, then this is going to start to drive more and more money into the banks, less consumer spending. It's going to make it difficult to get them to buy a new car. If this starts to happen, then you're going to have to see discounting taking place, and that's going to impact on the profitability and profit margins of the VW group. Then you've got the increasing level of competition, which is also starting to put pressure on the profit margins you're going to make, and you're going to have to drive costs down further. VW has started to do this by looking to move plants to cheaper areas of China, looking to take advantage of that regionalisation that they've got in the Chinese market. And of course, all of this is going to have an effect on the strategy you adopt as a company such as VW. You've got potential political instability. Now we say that because obviously we're looking at what's happening around the rest of the world. At the moment it is a communist country. Will it get an uprising again where people are going to start trying to push for change? If this happens, then that's going to have a massive impact on the economics of the organisation. And then you've got your trade barriers. The Chinese put protective barriers around their market to stop lots of imports coming in. Now, yes, okay, the currency's getting stronger, but you've still got to pay those tariffs that you've got to pay to get those cars in from the other part of the world, such like Bentleys from obviously the UK. And you've got to factor in how much protective barriers will be placed in by the Chinese to try and limit their own core market they've got in their domestic markets. Then we're going to look at the factors affecting the success or failure of businesses trading or operating with China. So factors affecting them are such as cultural issues. So the VW group has had to adapt to the cultural issues. They've had to work with local needs, local legislation in their factories. Now remember, the problem they've faced is that in every area of China they've operated, they've got different local laws they've had to adapt to. And this has been slightly different for the organisation, and the way that they communicate has been different. They tend to have to be less formal with the Chinese to make the structure work. Now this has been listed in their documents about the fact that in Germany, in Dusseldorf, they are much more firmer and regimented in the way they operate. Their language barriers. There are going to be communication issues. Now of course the VW group's core language is German, they speak English. Now the Chinese do speak English, however in many parts of China there are two languages that they're going to speak, so you're in theory relying on them to speak their second language in many places to communicate. Something that the VW group has successfully really overcome using the power of English, really, in fairness. Their organisation has overcome that barrier, and they list the fact that English is their key language to overcome any barriers. Legislation regarding car ownership is a threat. The Chinese are threatening to put in legislation to limit who can own a car, potentially down to one car per family. If that comes in, that is really going to hinder the amount of sales you can make as an organisation. Going to have a massive effect on the VW sales as a group, and it could, in theory, limit the potential growth of that market. And then you've got your communication barriers. Now, not all of China at the moment is as highly, so I'm trying to use the word like with internet, so it's highly built up with its infrastructure that you see in some parts like Shanghai and the inner cities. As a result of this, it's making it difficult to get communication out there. It's not as instantaneous as VW Group, for example, wants to have in an ideal world. This is becoming more a problem as they're looking to move to cheaper regions of China, where the infrastructure is even less developed than it is in some of the areas they are at the moment. All this is having a massive effect on their strategy and the way they operate as an organisation. Then, of course, we've got to look at the relative advantages and disadvantages of the way in which businesses might operate in the Chinese market, such as exporting, joint ventures, mergers, setting up production or other sales outlets. And of course, if we start looking at the obvious one, China is the world's largest exporter. There is no doubt about that. And as a result of that, that means that VW Group can tap into that. They can join that exporting pressures and get the cars out. Now, the benefits of VW see from this is the Chinese can manufacture cars in China fairly cheap with a lower unit cost, and then they can tap into new markets like India, for example. They are planning to launch the world's cheapest car in India in 2017. That is their long-term strategy plan, and that car will be manufactured in China and sold in China by 2015. That is their strategy they're looking to do, low-cost approach. China is also the world's second largest importer, which of course also benefits. So they're looking to import cars, and they're quite happy to have trade barriers and quotas which are favourable for importing of cars. Suits the VW Group because they can bring some of their other brands in, their high premium brands from overseas, which of course appeal to a large proportion of the Chinese market that do like Western brands. At the moment, VW has taken advantage of two joint ventures. Their first one was in 1984. And then they've made another one in 1991. So their joint ventures in their plant, they own 50% of their factory, their production capacity in China, It's been successful for that organisation. It's enabled them to grow and take advantage of the Chinese market. And of course, they've got a long-term strategy to utilise a low-cost focus approach. They are trying to reduce the unit cost, and this is what's constantly focusing in the VW Group's messages out there. They're using China as a way to get down costs, to tap in on a very competitive market with a low price, hence the drive to make a cheaper car. Of course, at the same time, they're also focusing on differentiation when they're looking for the high value items such as the Bentleys and the Lamborghinis and the Audis that they're trying to push out there. There are, however, concerns over intellectual property rights, and that is limiting some of the technology that's appearing in VW Group's cars, because there are concerns regarding how this will be exploited by other manufacturers, for example in China, because the laws tend to be regionalised, we looked at before. There tends to be issues regarding how protectionism is enforced in China, and the main brands don't want to lose their unique selling point, which is a real concern for them. And they are also concerned about the perception of quality, because customers tend to be looking in China at the moment for a lower price rather than a higher price vehicle. They're not prioritising quality at the moment. They're hoping this drive towards the middle classes will do that. And of course, the exporting element is worried about the fact that cars made in China may not appeal to a new market outside of there, like a Western market, for example, because consumers have issues about the Chinese manufacturing process and the Chinese quality that's being produced. All major concerns that are out there at the moment. The ethical and environmental issues involved in trading or operating with China. Now, in the VW Group, there are concerns at the moment over working conditions. As China has been starting to grow, and some of the developed areas of China are starting to grow, the VW Group started to focus its growth strategy in some of the other regions that's not as affluent. As a result of that, there are concerns that the working conditions are not as good. The monthly minimum wage in some of these areas is only £100 equivalent. This is enabling VW Group to carry on with their cost focus strategy, so they're looking at a low cost focus strategy at the moment to try and grow their organisation and make sure they're competitive in the market. However, it's raising questions about how the cars are being manufactured, how many hours are workers working in the factories, how ethical is it at the moment. There's also concerns regarding the legislation of car ownership, as I mentioned before, because what is this going to do to the market? For example, how will this impact the regional markets? So will it only affect the cities, or will it affect all of China? And this is another issue that's going to obviously concern many of the car manufacturers such as VW. And then there's real issues about this in car emissions, because this could bring in more technology, this could bring in increased costs. This could really impact on the so-called low-cost focus strategy that the organisations like VW have got in place at the moment. There are some severe impacts that may be hitting the organisations in the future in China. So just because it's a growing country at the moment with fairly low restrictive levels when it comes to legislation, these could soon change pretty quickly, mainly due to the Chinese government and the way they want to operate. So how business strategy might be affected by the developments in China? Well, at the moment they've got a cost leadership focus on the mass market. That's their main focus of the family market cars. And they're trying to differentiate with the idea of the niche market. So they're trying to get the Audis, the Bentleys, the Lamborghinis out to a very small but affluent growing market. So they've spotted the gap already. So they've got two markets already key there. They tend to be currently market development focused, because they tend to look at trying to develop their presence in a new market. However, they are trying to move towards this product development focus, where they're trying to bring in new approaches, like for example making that low budget car to try and get it into the market and really compete at the bottom end. But the idea is to drive through a new brand into China and then expand that into new markets. They don't want to damage the VW brand. They want to look to try and create a new brand that can cater for a new market both in China and outside of China. Now, of course, the short term is tending to utilise this lower unit cost approach. However, in the longer term, they're looking to try and establish brand loyalty and develop added value and develop a USP. These are all strategies that are going to be sort of long-term approach to the VW Group. They accept that developing in China is going to take time. However, it is really starting to take off. The biggest threat at the moment is the fear of legislation and restrictions being imposed by the Chinese government, and that is what's driving fear throughout the car industry at the moment and the external car manufacturers who have entered the Chinese market. Okay, that hopefully is giving you an idea of how the VW Group can link to the case study. It's a difficult one. I did it on purpose. I chose a hard organisation to use because obviously it shows you can link organisations which maybe are not so typical and try and find the connections. Hopefully what you're going to do is get some research of your own companies. It's alright me thinking I can create you lots of resources and show you examples. However, the reality is you will do much better if you go away and do some research yourself. You'll start to understand it yourself and think and remember some of those facts. And that's what it's key about, trying to put the information together. I really am sort of a firm believer in that idea that you've got to do some research and learn it yourself. There's no point going away and using standard examples that we've all learnt. Obviously I could have covered them quite easily. For your exam, remember that you need to make arguments for and against, and you need to use examples to support your point. In your structure, try and use terms in the short term, in the long term. They're really, really good points to make. Try and use commands such as like, however, it could be argued that, and on the other hand, they're all good argument points, and good evaluative levels to make there. One of the key things that I spotted in teaching, and obviously one of the things that I want you to try and make sure you don't do, is don't fill your answer just solely full of examples. You get to be an obsession with examples and data, and actually you don't tell me what, you don't answer the question, you're not showing me you understand what it's all about. So use the example to support your point, but don't just state those examples. Show the examiner you know what you're on about. So actually get your knowledge in there and then make your decisions, but use the example to support what you're saying. Don't just write a list of examples as some candidates do. Remember to make the synoptic links. You're doing a synoptic paper. Now obviously I'm going to say this as an example, but if you're writing about a marketing point and you can make links to, for example, to finance, human resources and operations by answering the question, clearly you've got to answer the question that's set, but show those links, make the links. Don't be afraid to link one area of the course to another area of the course. That's synoptic. That is where the high level of marks come from, by showing you understand the connections between the subjects. You are a business studies student. You've got to show the examiner you have studied this subject. Answer the question that's set. Remember, there is no set way to answer the question, right? You can get to the answer that you want at the end as long as you justify it and argue throughout. Nobody is going to tell you you have to do it in a certain way. And finally, plan before you even put pen to paper. Jot down some thoughts what you're going to do. Jot down a little example you're going to put into there. Try and draw some links. So how can you link that to that, So link, use some arrows on there. It doesn't matter. Just get the links in there, because then you're showing synoptic, then you're showing the higher level skills. As long as you start to pick up some of the marks in that level, you should do well in this exam. Okay, that's it. You should now be able to use an organisation like VW Group to support the arguments you're going to make for the BeeBusinessBee AQA exam paper. Hopefully you got an idea of how you can do that with my example. I want you to go away and do some with your own example. Go and do some research, find some organisations, find some links, and don't just pin all your hopes on the China section as well. Remember, this is only one part of the exam. You need to know the other elements. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at BeeBusinessBee. Check out my YouTube channel and subscribe to it. You can tweet me any areas of business you want me to cover in the future, and remember to visit my website beebusinessbee.co.uk.